every single tercet of the Divine Comedy is just wonderful. Hello, welcome back to this series of 100 videos for 100 cantos of Dante's Divine Comedy. Different background today. I'm still in the same house where I lived, same apartment complex, just a different location, and still in Los Angeles. Today is March the 26th, 2022. And we are going to read Canto 16 of Dante's Paradiso. It's a very interesting canto because it's left a lot of readers perplexed, a lot of commentators perplexed, and generally, whenever I see a presentation or a lecture or a lesson about this canto, in schools or university or anywhere else, the presenter generally starts with some kind of excuse and say, yeah, it's not as poetically intense as other cantos, it doesn't have the same type of... Now, I don't know if it's true or not. I feel like I shouldn't really judge on how poetic the canto is, because for me, it's all great. Every single tercet of the Divine Comedy is just wonderful. So I would maybe, think twice before saying that one canto of the Divine Comedy is not as strong as others, because who else can write this 100 cantos? The context is the same of Canto 15, so we are still in the sphere of Mars, where we are meeting with the courageous spirits and blessed souls who died for faith, who gave their life for faith and for God. And we are still in front of Cacciaguida, who is Dante's ancestor. And obviously, next to Dante, there's Beatrice, as always. And in the canto, there's going to be a simple dialogue between Dante and Cacciaguida. We could think of Canto 15, 16, and 17 as a triptych, as a beautiful artistic triptych, where maybe 15 is the thesis, 16 is the antithesis, and 17 is the synthesis. Because 15 is showing us the good old times, 16 is going to show how badly corrupt morally the current times of Florence are for Dante, and 17 is going to offer a light, a hope, the right direction, a solution, let's say, to make things better, not only in Dante's times, but universally. In any time, whoever is applying these concepts to their own reality, including us today. So I find it still really engaging, and if there are so many names of people from Florence, families from Florence who used to be there, and even in Dante's time didn't exist anymore, the families had disappeared, it's only in the last third of the canto, and they're presented in a still rather engaging way. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, of course, in this. I think this video should be a little bit briefer than usual. Here we go. O poca nostra nobiltà di sangue, se gloriar di te la gente fai, qua giù, dove l'affetto nostro langue, mirabil cosa non mi sarà mai, che là dove appetito non si torce, dico nel cielo, io me ne gloriai. Dante is talking about his own glory, his own pride, in fact, and it's with much more tenderness and understanding that he looks at his own pride as part of his own identity, in fact, here in Paradiso, because we know that he has cleansed himself already from all the dysfunctions of his soul, including pride. It was the major sin for Dante's life, self-consciously so. But here, he's not really sinning of pride. He is simply acknowledging that just to think about those drops of noble blood that he has in his body made him happy, made him happy. And he says, if even to me, who I was in that moment cleansed and pure, and I was in the sky I was admitted in the heaven of Mars, even to me, thinking about nobility made me happy, gave me a pang of pleasure and happiness, then we can understand how powerful it is for people on earth, for anybody, to think about nobility in his times. It's fairly easy to think about, to transpose that to our times. Today we don't have really nobility in our reality, but we do have last names that are more important than other last names. We have families that are considered to be more important or wealthier than others. A lot has to do with money as well in our times, but also the name, the circle, and so the popularity. All this is something that can make this canto resonate more with us, I think. I love this epic tercet at verse 7. Ben sei tu manto che tosto raccorce, sì che, se non s'appon di dì in die, lo tempo va d'intorno con le force. He is comparing nobility to this coat, this mantle that keeps getting shorter and shorter, and that as if time was cutting it with scissors constantly. Therefore, you have to keep working on it. You have to keep putting patches on it to make it go back to its original length by operating noble actions, by behaving in a noble way. Otherwise, that is going to disappear. That's a very colorful simile, and it really makes us think that Dante, at the end of the day, was not dismissing nobility. He was not talking about nobility as something completely worthless and to be discarded completely. He recognizes a seed of value in nobility. However, more importantly, he says to us that nobility is mostly something that has to be worked at constantly. Otherwise, it doesn't really have any value in itself. We will see in the next canto, in Canto 17, a couple of examples of people who were noble and who, in Dante's view, deserved that title. The next tercets are very interesting from a grammatical point of view, because what Dante is doing here is, in a tercet at verse 10, he's telling us what he's going to say without really showing us the direct dialogue. Then he makes a comment about Beatrice's behavior, and then he actually gives us the dialogue. So first he says, I started to speak using this pronoun voi, and voi is generally in Italian is translated as you guys. It's the second plural person in Italian, voi. But in Dante's times, and still in some places or some areas in Italy today, even though it's been dying away, it's still used as an honorific way to address somebody. And the tradition, let's say maybe a legend in Dante's times, wanted that this had started with Julius Caesar, because he was the first one to group all the powers of the state into one single person, and therefore, because he was representing so many different public powers, then instead of saying you as singular second person, you should address him as with a plural second person, voi. This then entered the French language and other, let's say, Romance languages, etc. It's been proven that is not true. That's not really the origin story of this particular way of addressing people, honorific voi, but that's what Dante thought. And he uses this comment simply to give us an example of how this nobility of his ancestor is touching him very much, and is moving him to try and be as respectful as he can. He talked to Cacciaguida in the previous canto, telling him tu, which is the usual you, the friendly you, let's say. But here he changes and he uses voi, which is the honorific. And Beatrice, as a reaction, he gives an amused smile, just like parve quella che tossio al primo fallo scritto di Ginevra. Ginevra is Queen Genevieve, and this is a quote from the Lancelot, French poem, where the Lady of Malehot was one of the queen's companions, and she had given in this romance, in this novel, a little cough to advise Lancelot and the Queen Genevieve that they have been talking in an intimacy together about somebody approaching, and therefore it's a sign of somebody who is recognizing a potentially embarrassing situation. It's a very pleasant and lovely, really, exchange between Dante and Beatrice. We see her presence always alive, constantly alive. So what Dante is doing here in his address to Cacciaguida is basically, he's asking him 4 questions. He's asking him, who were your ancestors? He's asking him in what year he lived, Cacciaguida, or years Cacciaguida lived. How many people in Florence were there in those times, because he's interested in the ancient Florence. And which ones were the most important, the most respected families in Florence in those times. And so this is what Cacciaguida, this is the structure, let's say, of Cacciaguida's answer or monologue that will cover the rest of the canto. As we know very well, when it comes to giving a direct answer, Dante's characters are not the greatest characters in literature, in world literature, because when it comes to giving Dante the year of when he lived, Cacciaguida makes a whole paraphrases that sounds like an enigma of the Sphinx here. He's talking about Mars. You have to know that one Martian year is 687 days, earthly days. And you do the mathematics, you come to the year of birth of Cacciaguida, which was 1091. That's what he is saying. In da quel dì che fu detto ave means simply from the day of incarnation. So that was the day. But in Florence in particular, they used to have the year start from the 25th of March, which was the Annunciation, still is the Annunciation day, a Christian celebration, a Christian festivity. This is why Dante is referring specifically to Ave, to Mary, because of the Annunciation scene. And Cacciaguida says that not only when he was born, but he also says where. In Florence, verse 40, gli antichi miei e io nacqui nel loco dove si trova pria l'ultimo sesto, da quei che corre il vostro annual gioco. He is indicating the most ancient area of Florence. So this gives even more shine to Dante's nobility, because it means that really Dante's root found his family roots in the most ancient part of Florence. Verse 46, between the Baptist and Mars, means simply between the Ponte Vecchio, or the Old Bridge, which is a very famous touristic area in Florence today, and the Battistero. So between those areas, which is the Old Florence, there used to be 1/5 of men able to bear arms than there are today in Dante's times. That's the answer to the question, how many people were in Florence. This Mars, this mentioning Mars for the Ponte Vecchio, is a way to easily remind the contemporary readers of the Divine Comedy that there was a statue of Mars just at one of the extremes of the Ponte Vecchio, of the old bridge. That's why he's saying tra Marte e il Battista, between Mars and Battista, il Battistero. They were basically the northernmost and southernmost limits of the city back then. So 1/5, but the citizen, the people, la cittadinanza, pura vediesi nell'ultimo artista. They were all pure down to the most lowly artisan. It may sound here like Cacciaguida starts something of a almost classy or racist monologue, because he starts talking about sostener lo puzzo del villan, the smell of somebody who comes from the farms. Now, yes, in one sense, Dante was very upset by the combination, of the different behaviors of the ancient Florentines and these new people who were immigrating in from the countryside, and that is true. However, this is not really the sense, this is not the negative sense that Cacciaguida is giving to these words. And to help me with this concept, I'm going to read a quick paragraph from Father Paul Pearson's Spiritual Direction from Dante, Yearning for Paradise. Father Paul says, as we shall see later in line 67, or verse 67, Cacciaguida's comment here is not intended to discriminate against the outsiders who are stinking up Florence. It sounds like that's what he's saying, but that's not really the point of his monologue. That attitude would be in contradiction to his general message. Society's unity is the central theme, is the point. The challenge he places before us is the problem of integration, of becoming and remaining one society. So the question here, or the problem, is how to remain united, one strength, one force, even when there are challenges, like, for example, different habits, different traditions, and different cultures coming into a group that was more homogeneous before. There are also some important historic considerations to make here, but the most important one probably, is an agreement that was made among all the most powerful people, barons of Tuscany, right after the death of Henry VII, the Emperor Henry, right after the death of the Emperor Henry VI. When Henry VI died, very shortly thereafter, I think probably the same year, in 1197, around that time, close to 1200, the League of San Genesio, or Tuscan League, was formed, which was a pact, basically, an agreement, a pact, a power agreement among all these barons that had some power in Tuscany and the Pope, the current Pope. All the lands in Tuscany were belonging to powerful families, to different wealthy people. Some of them were barons who were protected by the emperor, and therefore, in fact, some of these territories were still of ownership or property of the empire, theoretically and, let's say, legally. And some of them were actually protected or on the side of the Pope, because we know the two main political powers were empire and the papacy. So what happened with this Tuscan League is that after it was ratified, after it was signed, everybody who was owning a castle or a big piece of land, who didn't have the approval of the Pope, because the Pope was behind the Tuscan League, he was really the driver, in fact, all the people who didn't have his approval lost their right to their land. And therefore, anybody, the other barons who did have the approval of the Pope, had the sudden right to possess those lands and to take the property of those lands for themselves and kick out the other barons who were living in those lands. So there was a quick shift of power, and this created some social confusion, including a pretty massive, relatively speaking, movement of people from the farms towards the cities. And Florence saw a lot of this. Now, there is this particular couple of lines at verse 67, where Cacciaguida sounds very controversial, especially for us today, today's world where integration, equality is so important as a value. And he says, sempre la confusione delle persone, principio fu del mal della cittade. And it sounds so strange. We are wondering ourselves, is he saying that multiculturalism is the root of all evils for governing a city, for the good of a city? Isn't it the opposite? Have we not learned that the more diverse an organization, a group, a city is, the more social strength it can find? And again, my friend Father Paul has very wise words to comment this, and he says, Cacciaguida at verse 67 sounds like a racist, complaining that foreigners are ruining Florence. Why don't they just go back from where they came? But that would be to misunderstand his intention and to miss the real issue. When a distinct group of people enter a city or society, their presence can be destructive if they become a faction, if they become a very separated, isolated faction. Political parties within the city, too, can give rise to factionalism when respect breaks down, respect for the city as a collective good. So Cacciaguida is really telling us, he's being very factual, he's being very objective and not making a judgment against people who are moving into the city, but he's being very objective and even telling us in the next lines that smaller units, I'm still reading from Father Paul, smaller units of society are easier to keep unified than larger ones. And here he says, and a blind lamb will fall, but not so quick as a blind bull. It's not merely a case of the bigger they are, the harder they fall, but Cacciaguida is also saying the easier they fall because they're bigger. So it's never easy, but the bigger they are, the harder it is to form, to generate unity among people. For our nature, of course, for how we are very tribal in ourselves, in our DNA. In fact, if Dante had realized in his times that Florence had become really too big to aspire at an organic unity among its citizens, let's think about today and the size of megacities, megatowns. It's very complex, yes, but it does become more and more difficult, especially from a political standpoint, to find somebody who actually cares. Try to think about a politician that you know who actually genuinely cares about the city where he's working. I think it's difficult in this day and age. The final thing I want to highlight from this Canto 16 is towards the end, at verse 138 and 39, Dante is giving us a very, very important and crucial piece of the puzzle, of the historic puzzle of the Divine Comedy and of the history of Florence. Fundamentally, he's giving us the origin story of the Guelphs versus Ghibellines feuds and constant fight and constant hatred. This origin story, apparently according to the history of the chronicles of the times, comes from a fight, an actual specific physical fight that a member of the Amidei family in Florence had with a member of the Buondelmonte family. And this Buondelmonte guy was then promised in marriage to a daughter of the Amidei, as it's always been done in history to try and appease, at least relatively so, some kind of family hatred. So this happened, but instead of marrying this, instead of actually showing up the day of his wedding with this daughter of the Amidei, Buondelmonte, partially apparently because people were mocking him of how bad looking she was, and partially because somebody else had interjected by offering Buondelmonte another woman as his spouse, but much better looking. That's what it sounds like. In any case, he didn't show up the day of his wedding. At this point, the Amidei took extreme offense, and they decided to kill Buondelmonte. And from this moment, there is an endless and constant cycle and series of revenges, revenging one side, revenging the other side, that grew and grew and grew, and it really became the two big factions of Guelphs, who were supporting the Pope, and Ghibellines, who were supporting the Emperor. So in Canto 16, Dante is identifying two main reasons for the fall of Florence, not fall from a material point of view, because Florence is an absolute Wall Street in these days, then from the external side, from the outside, is doing great. But just like Dante, who was doing great in 1300, inside he was in the dark woods. We always need to remember that Christianity has nothing to do with what is visible outside, has everything to do with what is inside. And inside, Florence was very corrupt, morally, in every sense, in Dante's times. It wasn't as corrupt back in Cacciaguida's times. So how is it possible? How to recuperate, to rekindle, and try to get that spark of honesty, of respect, and make it live again in Florence? This is a question that we could ask for any organization, any town, any area of our lives today. And the answer, in a very beautiful way, will come to us in Canto 17. So I will see you next time with a friend again, who's going to help me very gracefully to read through Canto 17. Thank you so much for watching this time again.